Hello, everyone. My name is Denis King. I am the CEO at Solace. I'm really excited to be here as a part of the Gravitee Edge conference. And I'm really keen to share with you some thoughts and ideas around event-driven architecture. More importantly, event-driven architecture in the context of the enterprise and API management. So the way I'm going to do that is talk about 4 different things. First thing I want to do is just take a step back and talk about events in your business. Events are everywhere, and not knowing exactly where you might be on your event-driven journey, we'll start at the very beginning about understanding events in the enterprise. Then we'll get into why is EDA or why are events becoming more pervasive in the enterprise. We're seeing events more and more every day. Well, why is that? We'll talk a little bit about that. Then we'll get more into the details about the architecture. There's the runtime part of the architecture, and then there's really your technology in terms of API management and what does that mean from an event perspective. And then I'll finish off with the idea of thinking about the broader ecosystem. Events are just one aspect of your digital transformation. How does that play into the overall ecosystem? And what is the partnership that Gravitee and Solace has forged to make this easier for you to deploy events in the context of API management? So let's dig into number 1. So think about your entire business as events. If you look inside your enterprise today, there is data changing all the time. Sometimes it's changing hourly, minutes, seconds. As that data changes, it really is an event. Unfortunately, most of the architecture of the enterprise today is designed to be point-to-point, request-reply, polling. That's not a bad thing, but it's not the only way to architect your systems. If you think about changing data and you think about it as an event, there's an opportunity to make things far more faster, far more agile, and to drive better response times in your applications. And so if you think about this customer right here that's buying a product, the second that that person swipes their credit card or taps on the payment system, or it could be an online shopper buying something online, the moment that that happens, inside of any enterprise, there tends to be hundreds, could be tens, 50, hundreds of different applications that care about that one event. In the context of retail or CPG, when you buy a product of a particular inventory, there are always downstream applications that are wanting to know about that change. And so in a perfect world, in an event-driven world, they would take action and they would be passively waiting to take action of that change. So systems like an inventory management system, merchandise management system, maybe less important, but even customer loyalty systems. There are supply chain systems, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 supply chain systems that could all take action from these events as they occur. And when these systems receive those events, they typically do take action, like decrement an in-store and online inventory amount, request a replenish from a stock room. And what tends to happen is it generates more and more events. So if you start to think about all of the different changes in the enterprise, and you think of applications being producers of information and consumers of information, you can really start to think about how your enterprise can be decoupled and have less dependencies on everything being point-to-point and request-reply. So with that in mind, let me actually give you a real customer example in the retail space and the difference between a customer experience of someone who is event-driven versus a customer who might not be event-driven. So here's Frank. Frank walks into a store, he buys a hockey stick, happens to be the last hockey stick on the shelf. And we see this example all the time. We have a lot of retail clients that talk us through the same challenge. So imagine Frank goes in, he buys the last hockey stick. If you're a non-event-driven business, well, what tends to happen is nothing. The shelf is empty. There's no more hockey sticks on the shelf. This other person comes into the store moments later. He goes down the aisle. He's really upset because there's no hockey sticks left. And so that's a loss of sale because no one knew about the systems that actually drive replenishing the shelves were not updated. And then even worse, the warehouse in the back was not updated of that shelf being empty. So it does not proactively order more inventory for the next few days. So now you have a lull in your inventory, which will further impact your sales. And then you have Jane, who's another customer who goes online. It's Friday evening. She has a hockey tournament for her son. She actually goes online and checks online to see what the quantity of hockey sticks are at this store. And because the online system and the inventory management system is out of date with what's actually happening on the floor, she sees that there's 5 hockey sticks available. So she jumps in her car, she runs down to this particular store, she goes to the same aisle of this guy, and what does she find? No hockey sticks. So now she's really upset. So now you have a frustrated customer and no sale. And last but not least, maybe not as important, but when Frank buys that hockey stick, he doesn't get his loyalty program updated for 2 days later. Not a very good customer experience. And this is the kind of thing we see all over the enterprise within retail and CPG. Now let's contrast that to a real-time or an event-driven experience where our applications are now communicating in a much more real-time way. The moment that Frank buys that hockey stick and he taps his credit card to purchase it, there's an event that goes into the inventory management system. Someone's out on the floor immediately replenishing that shelf. And of course, the warehouse now knows that there's a shortage of this particular product, so it's already proactively ordering it, so there's no change or a lull in inventory, and so there's always product to sell. Of course, Jane now goes down to the store because she saw 5 hockey sticks on the shelf, and there's actually 5 there. She buys a hockey stick. She's super excited and pumped, and she's a happy customer, so there's more sales there. And last but not least, as Jane and Frank both leave the store, they get an alert immediately saying they've crossed a new threshold in their loyalty program. The points are awarded immediately. Just a great customer experience. And so event-driven architecture goes beyond any one system. It's about the interaction of all of the systems in the enterprise and just making it simpler to expose the information that's changing in real time. Now, it's not just Solace saying this, it's not just Gravitee saying this. I think we've seen events and event-driven architecture becoming much more pervasive in the last several years. And I really love this from Yafim Natis, who is one of the main analysts at Gartner, who follows events, middleware, event-driven architecture. And I think he said it best a few months ago. He said, the world is event-driven. Can you afford not to listen? I think that really defines events. If you think about our world, whether you stand up, sit down, a door opens, a door closes, a plane leaves a gate, a plane lands, you scan a boarding pass, these are all events. And if you think architecturally about that, it will fundamentally change how you think about building systems in an enterprise. And so this is happening, and it's great to see the analysts actually pushing it as well. And last but not least, there's lots of industry experts out there talking about events as well. I was really impressed by Werner Vogel it was almost a year ago now, at the last Amazon re:Event. He got on stage and spoke for 25 minutes about events, event-driven architecture. He said the world is event-driven and the world is asynchronous. That's not to suggest that we only should have asynchronous communication and that synchronous has gone away. It's really about the need for both. There's a need for synchronous at times, certain times, and there's a need for asynchronous in other times. And so this was another great testament to the fact that events are here to stay. It is becoming pervasive. They are becoming pervasive. And it's something that we all have to think about. All right, number 2. So understanding the why. So why is this happening now, and why not 5 years ago? Why not 10 years ago? And I'm going to do that through 2 different ways. I'm going to talk about the evolution of the enterprise very quickly. I don't think that will take very long for us to all agree on. And then I'll get into business value. So a lot of people struggle with the killer use case, or what business value, or why should I do this with events, or what's the difference with events? So I'll talk about these 2 things. So I'll first talk about the evolution of the enterprise, and then I'll get into the business, the value part. So in terms of the evolution, I like to talk about the more. If we look at the ecosystem of the enterprise today, starting in the top left, there's more applications than there ever have been before. We all know this, and the statistics would tell us that there's actually more than 1,000 applications inside of an enterprise today. We've experienced this. We have a customer that has 17,000 different applications. And so there's more applications that want to communicate. And the challenge really is these applications are more distributed than they've ever been before. Most enterprises now are hybrid cloud or multi-cloud. And these applications are distributed across private cloud, public cloud, multi-cloud. And then there's brick and mortar locations. There's factory floors. There's different locations that are trying to connect in and participate in that communication. So the distributed nature of the applications is making it even more difficult. There's more data, 25% more data every single year in the enterprise. And probably the most important point in the bottom right here is that the sensitivity of information today is far greater than it's ever been. There's not a single application not a single system, device, nothing, no human being that would want information today slower than they had it yesterday. So when you put these four things together, it's really making application integration harder. And that's both from an integration context and an API management context. And event-driven architecture is not the only answer. It certainly is one of the answers. And it can really help you solve many of the challenges that we face in this type of environment. We can think about some of the challenges about being very centralized, very hub and spoke, monolithic, moving that to more of a decentralized microservices architecture. We know that point-to-point request-reply REST is often very tightly coupled, and that is necessary in certain circumstances, but there are lots of circumstances where you can be asynchronous, loosely coupled, and change the pattern to more of a publish and subscribe. And last but not least, batch-based polling is very hard on various system of records and databases. And we know it's not real time, and surely you can improve batch by polling faster, but that doesn't change the fundamental paradigm of the problem. Event-driven is about push, it's about decoupling, it's about real time, and that's what we're starting to see in the industry. So from an infrastructure point of view, these are some of the things driving the need for events and event-driven architecture. If I now switch to business value, so what are some of the business value that people are achieving with events? Customer experience is a big one. Agility and innovation is another one. Operational efficiency is another one. And just future-proofing for your cloud architecture is another one. I'm going to walk through each one with a customer example just to give you an idea of some of the customer problems that EDA is solving. So on the customer experience side, I often relate customer experience to application response time. And if you go inside of any architecture, and in this case with Airtel, it's the architecture that actually provides new credits for your calling card. So we're the backbone for Airtel's architecture for how a customer may want to put more minutes on their calling card. And when we approach this architecture, there's probably 30 different systems that had to be interacted with synchronously from the moment that you request those minutes to the moment that you get those minutes back. And when we think about customer experience, one of the things we always do with our customers is go through a journey of understanding what applications need to be synchronous and which applications need to be asynchronous. Because not all of those 30 systems need to be synchronous. And if any one of those systems is offline or any one of those systems is slow for whatever set of reasons, that impacts the response time to the customer. And so with Airtel, by going through this journey, we were able to take 50% of these applications and make them asynchronous. And some of those had to be synchronous. And by doing that, we took the time it would take for the average customer to put more credits on their card. It was 30 minutes. We took it down to under 5 minutes for 98% of the users in the Airtel infrastructure. So customer experience and application response time is always a big element of event-driven architecture. Agility and innovation. Agility for us is about bringing on new applications. And often organizations are trying to scale up. They're bringing on new applications, and those applications are often being brought up because it's new locations, new factory floors, new sites that are coming online. And in the case of Unilever, most people are familiar with master data management. The Unilever architecture was, their master data system was centralized in a couple of different locations, and every different factory floor, every new location that Unilever was bringing on would have to pound request reply information from that master data management system. So you can imagine Unilever builds many different consumer goods around the world, and they have recipes and bill of materials that these different factories require. And to be requesting or applying that all the time, highly dependent, highly coupled, and problematic for every time a new factory was coming online. Going to an event-driven architecture was this idea that, well, why should we poll something when we can just push it out passively as a producer? So now their master data management is published out as it changes in real time, and factories just sit there as a passive listener and take action based on what they're seeing. And so if you're a new factory floor coming online, you can just subscribe to the recipe and the bill of materials that you require, and it's completely decoupled, and there's no information or no integration required with the core MDM system. And so by doing that, we were able to help Unilever bring down their time to bring a factory online by 50%. Very significant. And this is, using event-driven architecture is really about how you scale up applications in a very, very fast way. Operational efficiency is another benefit of event-driven architecture. Operational efficiency is often more of a collecting information for telemetry context, and then pushing out something based on what you're learning in that information for using command and control. Etica is a big Solace customer. They're a larger European retailer, and they were trying to solve the problem of produce at every location and being able to do real-time price changes to the produce based on the shelf life declining or getting close to the shelf life of the produce, and changing the price in real time so that they could sell more product faster before the shelf life expires. And so to accomplish something like that, it's hundreds of stores around Europe, lots of events being pumped into a system, and then command and control taking action out to change the price. And so you can imagine connecting up a store, connecting up all the produce bins, and actually sampling how full is the bin in real time, what is the shelf life of that bin, and as you see a large amount of produce still available, shelf life getting close to end, you would have to change the price in real time to something lower so you could drive more sales before you had to throw that product out. Huge savings with Etica in that area, a very event-driven architecture and concept, and operational efficiency is often a use case that looks like that. Last but not least, future-proofing, sort of a cliche term to use, but most customers are moving to the cloud, have moved to the cloud. And whenever you bifurcate your applications, you never move to the cloud overnight in one shot. You have applications left on premise, and you have some number of applications either being developed in the cloud or shifting to the cloud. And that separation often has a WAN, a wide area network component. And most people know when you do REST or point-to-point or HTTP over the wide area network, for anything that requires any form of real-time communication, it's really chatty, it's poor, it's slow. And so event-driven architecture is a much better way to streamline that communication over the wide area network for your hybrid multi-cloud applications that are separated. You get far more efficiencies over the WAN. It's way less chatty, and that drives a lot of efficiency and allows these applications to still feel like they're near one another, even though they're globally, if not regionally, distributed. So here are some great examples of business value of why you might embrace event-driven architecture. And I'm sure you can relate to many of these. Okay, so number 3, now let's get into the details a little bit. Let's get into rethinking your enterprise architecture in the context of EDA and in the context of API management. To do that, I'm going to talk again 2 things. I'm going to talk runtime, which is really what moves events around. And then I'm going to talk about the design, the development, the governance, the auditability of events. And that's really where we get into event management and API management and the relationship between Solace and Gravitee. So on the runtime side, this one's fairly straightforward. I love this picture from Gartner. I actually think it hasn't gotten enough mention in the market, but I think it fundamentally defines how we believe the industry is moving and really how people need to think about events and really develop this event-driven mindset. The left-hand side is the world we know. It's the world we've seen for 3 decades, right? You have the system of record at the center. Could be a database, but it's really where all your information is, and everything else around it, whether it's an application or a service, is just requesting and replying and pounding that database or that system of record to get the information that it wants. And of course, if it needs it faster, it just pulls faster. And that's really the architecture of the internet. It's the architecture that we know. And events are like a sideshow where if you have to send something out like a webhook, you just sort of push it out. And that's sort of your event-driven world. The right-hand side is thinking about your enterprise very differently. It's thinking about events as free-flowing information at the center of your architecture. It is decoupled, it's agile, and everything else around it is almost like a microservice that's listening to the event it cares about and is taking action and triggering based on that event. And if you want to collect state or you want to do analytics, well, you would collect the state and analytics as a passive listener, collecting the information you care about based on your business events that are flowing through the enterprise. That's a very different way to think about your architecture. And this is what we're seeing all around the world in customers that are really trying to decouple and scale and move faster in the world that we live in today. And from a Solace perspective, just to plug a little bit here on what we do, one of the things from a runtime or infrastructure point of view that we do, and if I go back to that example of Frank at the very beginning, If you go into any large retailer, there are a bunch of systems at the front that interact with the customer. That's your point of sale system, that's your payment processing, that's your customer support. And there's always these systems on the back end that are always full of information, and that information is always changing. Order management, loyalty programs, the supply chains, as I mentioned. And what Solace really does is provide this thing called an event mesh. It's a distributed multi-event broker architecture that connects up all these systems, senses the changes, and makes sure every single change is streamed and pushed in real time to the system that cares about it. And this is the fundamental shift that we're seeing in the enterprise. And the Solace platform really makes this simple, single pane of glass that allows you to actually deploy this at scale in a large enterprise across hundreds or thousands of different locations. So that's the runtime piece. Now let's get into the design, development, governance, and auditability. And this is really where API management comes into play. I think we're all very familiar with API management and the architecture, which I'll get into in a second. But we're also familiar with this concept of API products, something that's been around for quite some time. API products help other folks consume your business capability. It's an abstraction layer to make everything simple so people can consume your capabilities and your information. We bundle these API products in a way that meet the needs of developers, that serve different functions. They're all based on REST and synchronous for long-term value versus sort of one-time projects. We try to get some level of reuse. They're produced, they're shared, and they're consumed. It's a single place where all developers go to build RESTful applications. And they're typically managed by a product manager. There's a roadmap and a price and a life cycle. And it all aligns with the Gartner world of packaged business capabilities. And so that's what we know. That's the world we love. Gravitee has an unbelievable capability, and we'll get into the event native part of their capability in a moment. But this is what we're familiar with. And the question is, well, what about event-driven APIs? What if you want to push something? What if you want to build an event-driven application? How do you define an event? How do you discover an event? How do you reuse an event? What's the whole lifecycle strategy for this new evented world? And the quotes on the right-hand side from Gartner, again, supporting the idea of architects must develop new approaches to mediating and governing event-driven APIs, because API management platforms designed only for RESTful APIs may not be sufficient. I think this is what we're seeing, and this is really the evolution of an emerging market called event management. And let me just use the API management analogy to give you a sense as to how we were inspired to do something similar for events. So from an architecture point of view, we are very familiar with the API management stack. You have API gateways, and the world is now moving now where lots of enterprises will have different API gateways for internal and external consumption. This market is very well understood. And of course, on top of the API gateway, you have this thing called an API portal. And we're even seeing the industry now move towards API portals being API gateway agnostic. But the purpose of the API portal was to catalog, document, discover, share, reuse, analyze, extend, and design, generate code. It's really the place where developers go to build RESTful request reply style applications. So in a similar way, for event-driven architecture, you have these things called event brokers. That's what we just talked about. Solace has an event mesh, which is a distributed set of event brokers. And those event brokers provide more of instead of request reply pattern, it's a different pattern called publish and subscribe. And so it's your decoupled broker that allows people to push, decouple, scale, all the things that we just talked about. But what about the top part of this? Well, this is where Solace has developed this thing called an event portal. It is in this event management space that Gartner is defining. And we're certainly working closely with all the analysts on this front. But this event portal is where you would catalog an event. It's where you define the metadata for an event. It's where you would discover what events are actually flowing in the runtimes. It's where you share, reuse your events, analyze, audit, provide governance on your events. And it's where your application developers would go to develop event-based applications. And so this is the worlds that are coming together, and this is what we are doing with Gravitee. And so to go a little further on the event portal is a UI-based capability. It interacts with the runtimes, and it allows architects and developers to catalog and share and visualize and govern all of the events, in particular the schemas but also categorize things in the applications that are communicating. So this right-hand picture, we like to call this the choreography of an event-driven architecture. So in any event-driven system, there's a lot of flows that are moving within these brokers. And because it's all asynchronous, you have to have a way to control what information is allowed to go to what consumers. And it's nice to be able to visualize what producers are communicating with what subscribers. And that's what this choreography picture is all about. And so this is the event portal. And together with the API platform of Gravitee, it's an unbelievable capability to bring a unified catalog and a unified stack together for your events and your RESTful APIs. And so this is Gartner. This just came out last week. Unbelievable. Like this is them pushing this whole idea of event management. It is real now. I think we all know that EDA is pervasive. Gartner says 92% of organizations are using some form of EDA. And because of the level at which it's become pervasive, there's a demand for governance, for security. I mean, they're saying all the things I just said. And this is the picture they just came out with. We see event governance down in the bottom circle with schema registry, a developer portal, and event catalog, schema definitions. And this is the whole event management space that's being defined. So it's an important part of the market. It's essential to make event-driven architecture simple. It will allow people to organize themselves around events, what they are, and how to scale them within an organization. Okay, last but not least, so we talked about API management, we talked about event portal. So what else do you have to think about in the context of the ecosystem? Well, I think when you talk to any CIO, or if you look at the deployments within an enterprise, it's not just events, it's not just API management. Most organizations buy or purchase the technology, or the lens they look through is really one of these two capabilities. It's either API management, they're API led, or the API economy, or they look at digital transformation through the lens of integration. It's usually one of these two, and this is why most of the API management companies, they have an integration capability and vice versa. And the challenge with these two markets or these two technologies is that they're generally based on only point-to-point request reply, only polling. Integration tends to be hub and spoke with orchestration in the center, all HTTP out to the various applications. API management and the gateways are all based on RESTful, and it's been around for quite some time. But what's changing is the need for events. Now, Gravitee up at the top here has taken the lead as being the only API management company out there that is thinking events, living and breathing events as a core part of API management. Solace from an entire event broker, event portal, infrastructure point of view, and SaaS has a full platform for events. And what we're seeing now is the demand for these three things to come together. Integration is necessary. You have to have integration to have your SaaS applications communicate, but there's a way to event enable that. API management, based on point-to-point, there's a way to event enable that. And the way that Solace views the market in combination with Gravitee is that these three things are effectively coming together. There's a convergence happening. And this is really where Solace is spending a lot of time on investment, innovation, is to try to make this seamless for the client. And that's the basis for our relationship with Gravitee. It's our platform seamlessly integrated into their event management, their API management platform. We have many different integration partners. I threw SAP up. SAP views Solace as their event-driven architecture partner for their integration suite. And so we work closely with them on all things integration. So the idea here, though, is to think about the convergence that's happening. This is an ecosystem play. We spend a lot of time making sure our platform is seamlessly integratable into many different technologies out there to make it possible for them to event enable what they already have. And last but not least, this is the future of event-driven applications in the context of API management. With Gravitee and Solace coming together like this, we are the first organization in the world to provide a unified developer portal for your events and your API. So you can bring API-based products, event-based products. You can stream through the brokers, and you can do request reply through the gateways. I'm really excited about the partnership we've forged with Rory and the team at Gravitee, and I look forward to working with them more in the field. So that's it for me. Thanks so much for giving me the time, Rory and the Gravitee team. I hope your Gravitee Edge show goes smoothly. Thank you so much. Look forward to hearing from you.